They tried to take everything after my father died, my money, my home, my peace. But they didn't know I was ready. I had proof. And when the time came, I walked away with my dignity. And the truth. My name is Lauren Mitchell, and if you'd asked me 2 years ago what my life looked like, I would have said peaceful, maybe even idyllic. I had a husband who brought me coffee in bed, in-laws who pretended to like me, and a modest home filled with memories. Then my father passed away, and everything changed. My father was a quiet man, private and precise, the kind of man who believed in contracts, backup plans, and legacy. I was his only child, and when he died, I inherited everything: the family estate, his carefully crafted investments, and a sum large enough to change lives and ruin them. Andrew, my husband of 7 years, wasn't poor by any means. But the moment the inheritance came through, I saw a shift in his eyes, like he was calculating rather than mourning. At first, I thought I was imagining it. The extra kisses on my cheek, the sudden interest in financial planning, the way he started referring to our money. Then came Evelyn, Andrew's mother. She showed up with a tray of cookies and a tone that was just a bit too sweet. She clutched my hand and said things like, "Your father was so generous," and "Family should stick together, especially now." And then she moved in. "Just for a while," she said. I didn't argue. I was still in shock, still grieving. I didn't have the strength to push back. I thought maybe having people around would help fill the silence left behind. It didn't. Weeks passed, and Evelyn took root like ivy, subtle, quiet, but everywhere. She started reorganizing the kitchen. She made comments about my clothes. She accidentally opened my mail. And Andrew? He was no longer my partner. He was her accomplice. The two of them made decisions without me, then gaslit me when I protested. "You're just overwhelmed," Evelyn would say with that syrupy voice. "Babe, relax," Andrew would add. "She's only trying to help." Help? One night, I found Evelyn in my office, my father's office, going through drawers. She said she was looking for a pen. There was a full set in the kitchen. I started keeping the door locked. Then one afternoon, I received a call from my father's attorney. He wanted to check in to make sure everything had transferred properly. I thanked him, and just before we ended the call, he said, "Oh, and I trust you haven't made any financial changes yet?" I hadn't, but the question hung in the air. That night, I checked the estate accounts. There were no discrepancies, but Andrew had tried to access them twice. Failed attempts, but attempts nonetheless. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I started looking for legal advice, quietly, carefully. I found a lawyer who specialized in high-net-worth divorces. I met him under the pretense of estate planning. He listened, then leaned forward and said, "You need to protect yourself, immediately." That was the first moment I realized what I was in wasn't grief. It was a trap. Evelyn and Andrew had turned my home into a chessboard, and they were playing together. The next week was a blur of discreet meetings, hidden folders, and late-night journaling. I created backup copies of everything: titles, trusts, passwords. I scanned documents, took pictures, and stored flash drives in a bank safety deposit box. One evening, I overheard them whispering in the kitchen. Evelyn's voice, "She's too emotional to handle that much money. Maybe you should talk to the lawyer, Andrew. If I push too hard, she'll suspect something." My heart pounded so loudly I thought they'd hear it. I backed away from the door. I knew then, there was no love left in that house. Only strategy. I stopped speaking unless necessary. I stopped reacting. I stopped letting them see me bleed. Instead, I planned. Because if they were going to try and take what was mine, my father's legacy, then they had no idea who they were dealing with. They'd underestimated the daughter of the man who spent his life preparing for every worst-case scenario. And now, so had I. I checked the login activity. 2 failed attempts to enter my password, and worse, the webcam light had turned on during the night. I confronted Andrew. "Must be a glitch," he shrugged. I didn't respond. I just changed my passwords again and took my lawyer's next piece of Advice? Gather evidence? All of it. Document everything? So I did. From that day forward, I documented every word, every shift in tone, every attempt to guilt me into handing over my inheritance. I kept a journal. I backed up video files. I recorded conversations with a small device my attorney had given me. Because when the time came, I wasn't just going to walk away. I was going to walk away with proof. 3 days after the laptop incident, Andrew stopped pretending altogether. The charm vanished. The flowers stopped. The dinners ended. He didn't bother with sweet words anymore. He just hovered, watching me like he knew something was slipping through his fingers, but didn't know how to stop it. Evelyn, however, grew bolder. One morning, I walked into the kitchen and found her sitting at the table, barefoot, robe slightly open, drinking my coffee like she lived there. I froze. She looked up and smiled. "Lauren," she said, fake warmth dripping from every syllable. "We need to talk." I didn't move. "You need to leave." She didn't flinch. "I just want to make sure you're not doing anything impulsive. You're under a lot of stress. I'd hate for you to make a financial mistake just because you're grieving." I laughed, bitter and cold. "You mean like not handing over millions of dollars to a woman who hasn't worked in a decade and calls me greedy behind my back?" Her eyes narrowed. "Careful, Lauren. It's not wise to make enemies in your own home." I stepped closer. My voice was low and steady. "This house isn't yours, and neither is the money. Now get out before I call the police." She stood slowly, glaring at me. "You think you're so smart, but women like you crack, sooner or later." I didn't look away. I watched her until she left. Then I locked the door behind her. I took a breath, picked up the phone, and called my lawyer. "It's time," I said. "I want to move forward." We began preparing the divorce filing. Quietly, strategically. I had already moved half the inheritance into a trust, untouchable thanks to my father's foresight and how he'd structured the assets. The other half was still considered marital property, unless I acted quickly. That night, I asked Andrew to meet me at a cafe the next morning. Neutral ground, public, controlled. He agreed. He had no idea what was coming. I arrived early at the cafe, choosing a corner table with a clear view of the entrance. I had a leather folder in my bag and a flash drive in my pocket. Inside the folder, divorce papers. On the flash drive, months of evidence, video clips, audio recordings, email threads, screenshots, and one especially damning clip of Evelyn going through my desk drawers. Andrew arrived 5 minutes late, dressed in his usual business casual, wearing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Hey, Lauren," he said lightly, sliding into the chair across from me. "What's this about?" I didn't answer. I took out the envelope and placed it on the table between us. He glanced down. "What's this?" "Divorce papers," I said calmly. He blinked. "Wait, you're serious?" "Completely." He leaned back, scoffing. "Over money? You're ending our marriage? Over money?" "No," I said, locking eyes with him. "I'm ending it over disrespect, over betrayal. Over watching you and your mother treat my father's death like your opportunity." His face tightened. He reached for the folder, but I slid it slightly out of reach. "There's also a flash drive," I continued. "I suggest you hand it to your attorney. It includes proof of everything. Your mother snooping through my office, your attempts to access my laptop, and recordings of conversations that no one would be proud of in court." Andrew's face turned pale. "You planned this?" he said quietly. "No," I said. "You did. I just responded." He didn't speak again. Not a word. I stood up, tucked the folder back into my bag, and looked at him one last time. "Goodbye, Andrew." Then I walked out of the cafe and into the cool morning air. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. This wasn't revenge through rage. It was revenge through clarity, control, and self-respect. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is leave. If you've ever had to walk away from someone who didn't value you, you're not alone. Share your story in the comments. Like this video and subscribe for more real stories of strength and redemption. The divorce papers were delivered the next day, official, final, and impossible to ignore. Andrew didn't respond immediately. For 2 days, silence followed. No calls, no emails, no angry knocks at my door. I'd almost started to think he'd accepted it quietly. I should have known better. On the 3rd day, I arrived home from the bank to find Evelyn's car in the driveway. I walked in to see her pacing the living room, red-faced and shaking. "You're ruining everything," she snapped as soon as she saw me. I didn't bother asking how she'd gotten in. I had changed the locks, but she'd probably kept a spare or convinced Andrew to give her one. I stood by the door and let her rant. "You think you're better than us," she seethed. "You think just because your daddy left you a fortune, you get to destroy my family?" I tilted my head. "Your family? Interesting, because Andrew never seemed too interested in being one." Evelyn stepped closer. "I warned you, Lauren. Women like you always think you're strong until you're alone." "And women like you," I replied, calm but cold, "think they're entitled just because they've spent years manipulating their sons into becoming their proxies." She slapped me. It wasn't hard, more insulting than painful. But it stung. Not physically, emotionally. A lifetime of control and bitterness packed into one petty, desperate gesture. I didn't flinch. I just raised my phone, already recording. Her eyes widened. "You just assaulted me," I said softly. "Get out of my house, right now, or I press charges." Her mouth opened to protest, but she saw something in my eyes that finally made her back down. She left. I stood in the living room for a long time after, breathing in and out, letting the silence fill the space where her venom had lived. Then, I walked into the kitchen and poured myself a glass of wine. That night, I slept without fear. But the calm didn't last. Andrew's retaliation came swiftly and strategically. 3 days after Evelyn's meltdown, I received a letter from his lawyer demanding a full financial disclosure of all inherited assets, trust movements, and account statements. He was trying to claw into the trust, an impossible task thanks to my father's airtight protections, but it showed me one thing. He wasn't going down quietly. I sent everything to my attorney. We met the next morning at her office, where she reviewed the letter and smiled. "He's panicking," she said. "That's good for us." "Good? How?" "Because panicked men make mistakes. And when they're guided by pride instead of logic, they show their true colors. He'll overreach, he'll lie, and then we'll bury him with the truth." I leaned back. "How long do you think this will drag out?" "Depends how far he's willing to humiliate himself." I smiled. "Then let him." What happened next felt like something out of a courtroom drama, except it was real, raw, and broadcast for everyone to see. Andrew's legal team tried to paint me as unstable. They implied that I was emotionally compromised by my father's death, and therefore incapable of rational, financial decisions. They even submitted a psychological evaluation request, which my lawyer tore apart with precision. We responded with recordings, Evelyn snooping, Andrew admitting he'd accessed my devices, and text messages between them joking about how easy I'd be to push into signing over accounts. The judge, an older woman with sharp eyes and no tolerance for nonsense, was unimpressed with Andrew's posturing. After the 3rd hearing, she issued a temporary order freezing any shared financial movements and reprimanded Andrew's legal team for aggressive tactics. But the real blow came a week later. It was a Friday night fundraiser for local arts programs, one of the few social events I hadn't canceled since everything began. I wore a black silk dress and a quiet confidence I hadn't felt in years. I didn't expect Andrew to show up, but he did, arms linked with a blonde woman I didn't recognize. Young, polished, plastic. They arrived late, whispered with donors, and smiled for cameras. I watched from across the room, glass of champagne in hand. I didn't hide. I didn't shy away. When the MC called my name to thank me for my financial contribution to the Youth Scholarship Fund, I walked to the stage, applause ringing through the ballroom. And then I said this. "In memory of my father, I've donated $250,000 to help young women pursue education without needing to rely on anyone else. Because financial independence is power, and sometimes Walking away from the wrong people is the greatest lesson you can pass down. The room stood still, and then the applause roared again. I looked directly at Andrew. He didn't smile. His arm slipped from the woman beside him. She turned to him, confused. I turned away. A month later, the judge issued the final divorce decree. Andrew got nothing from the trust. The court upheld its structure as separate property. The remaining marital funds were split, but since Andrew had attempted fraud, his portion was reduced substantially, penalty and all. Evelyn was served with a restraining order after another uninvited entry. I moved out of the house and into a new space. Modern, quiet, secure. A place I chose. A place that was mine. The media had caught wind of the high-profile split. One article titled it, "Heir to a Legacy, Wife of Betrayal, the Woman Who Outsmarted Them All." I didn't care for the attention, but I wasn't hiding anymore either. I started a foundation in my father's name, focused on financial literacy for young women. I began mentoring others going through divorce. I even wrote a blog post that went viral. How I knew it was time to leave. I received thousands of messages, from women stuck in quiet battles, from men ashamed of being manipulated, from daughters who didn't want to repeat their mother's mistakes. One message stood out. "Thank you for reminding me that I'm not crazy. That trusting my gut is enough. That it's okay to walk away from a picture-perfect life when the frame is fake." That one made me cry. They say inheritance reveals who people are, but I think it does more than that. It forces you to decide who you are, what you'll fight for, what you'll protect, and what you'll never let anyone take from you again. I wasn't just my father's daughter. I was his legacy, and I would never again let someone treat that like a bank account. This story isn't just about betrayal, it's about clarity, about choosing yourself, about reclaiming the pen when others try to write your ending. And for anyone listening out there, if you're in a house where love feels like manipulation, where family feels like strategy, and where silence is your survival, just know, escape isn't weakness. It's strength, dressed in quiet armor. 3 months had passed since the court finalized the divorce. Andrew had retreated from the spotlight, his once glowing reputation tainted by whispers of attempted fraud and manipulation. Evelyn, unsurprisingly, became a ghost in the social circles she once proudly commanded. But I wasn't naive enough to think they were gone for good. I knew better. People like them don't disappear. They wait. It was a crisp October morning when the doorbell rang. I had just returned from a breakfast meeting with the board of my foundation, and the autumn breeze still clung to my coat. I wasn't expecting anyone, and visitors to my new home were rare, by design. I opened the door to find a young woman standing there, no older than 25, holding a small folder. She looked nervous. Her hands trembled slightly. "Hi," she said softly. "Are you Lauren Mitchell?" "Yes. My name is Haley. I work for the Sanderson Law Group. I was asked to deliver this to you, privately." She handed me the folder, hesitated, then added, "I didn't want to leave it in your mailbox. It's sensitive." I took it, thanked her, and watched her walk quickly back to her car. Back inside, I sat down at the dining table, heart already thudding. The law firm was unfamiliar, but not the name printed on the first page of the letter inside, Evelyn Martin. The letter was brief, and the attached documents even more damning. Evelyn, despite her bitter exit, had been quietly siphoning funds from an old dormant family account Andrew had access to from his college years. She used his login credentials to wire herself monthly allowances from a long-forgotten investment my father had originally opened for him when we were engaged. The account had been meant as a wedding gift, an untouched backup Andrew never mentioned. It was small compared to the rest of my father's estate, but the violation was personal. It proved something that chilled me to my core. Even after the divorce, they hadn't stopped. They were still circling. I sent the documents to my attorney and asked her to initiate fraud charges against Evelyn. But before we filed, she gave me an idea, one that would hit harder than any courtroom victory. "Offer her a deal," my attorney said, "but make it public." And so I did. I sent Evelyn a letter via certified courier, outlining her actions, the legal evidence I had, and a proposal. You sign a full confession, publicly disavow any claim to my family's legacy, and agree to repay the stolen funds, every penny. In exchange, I'll drop the criminal charges. Refuse, and I press forward. She took the deal. Signed confession was leaked online within the week, anonymously. A handful of financial influencers picked it up. Blogs reposted it. And the woman who once called me weak was now a cautionary tale about greed and aging manipulators clinging to relevance. Her social calendar cleared overnight. Andrew, it turned out, had tried to start over in a nearby city with the woman from the gala. But when she read the confession Evelyn signed, she ghosted him. Word spread. He was unemployable in any high-trust position. The man who once mocked my caution now couldn't even open a consulting firm without a background check pulling. Up court records and blog threads. The Mitchell name, my name, was clean. But his? Contaminated by his own choices. I didn't throw a party. I didn't post on social media. I didn't make speeches. Instead, I packed a small picnic basket and drove to the lake where my father used to take me as a child. There, sitting on the bench with a coffee and the final legal letter clearing me of all remaining obligations, I spoke aloud. You were right to prepare me, Dad. You always knew the storm would come. I felt the wind brush my cheek, soft as a hand on my shoulder. I wasn't alone. 6 months later, I was asked to give a keynote speech at a women's leadership summit. The theme was Legacy Through Resilience. I took the stage wearing a navy blue suit, my father's favorite color, and shared my story. Not the edited version, not the quiet one, the real story. I spoke about financial abuse, emotional manipulation, covert control, and the dangerous myth that wealth protects you from betrayal. I spoke about love turned strategic, family turned foe, and about the quiet courage it takes to start over when your whole life has been scorched by lies. And then I said this. I didn't rebuild because I had money. I rebuilt because I remembered who I was. The daughter of a man who believed strength didn't need to shout. And because of that, I've never been louder than I am now. Not in volume, but in truth. The standing ovation lasted longer than I expected. Today, I live on my terms. I travel, I mentor. I invest in women who've been silenced and remind them that silence isn't survival. It's a warning. The foundation thrives. My father's name now stands beside scholarships, shelters, and seminars. His legacy no longer lives in an account ledger, but in impact, in freedom, and in the fierce women who refuse to be used. And me? I'm not broken, I'm not bitter, I'm just better. So if you've ever been betrayed, manipulated, or underestimated, remember, revenge doesn't always come with fire. Sometimes it comes in peace, in rebuilding, in becoming a version of yourself. They never thought you could be. This was my inheritance, not money, but power, and I'm finally ready to spend it well.